Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Lawyer Interviews, your source for legal news, gossip, and celebrity insights. I'm your host, Jeff Dillon, and today we have once again Christon Halkiotis. Christon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me back again, Jeff.
Yes, it's great having you. And as a reminder, Christon, you worked on the prosecution side as well as now currently a defense lawyer.
Exactly.
Great. So today with Christon, we are going to discuss what do defendants do while waiting in prison or in jail. And as to provide examples, we're going to get into three celebrities who've spent time in jail or prison: Andrew Tate, Mike Tyson, and mobster Michael Franzese. So Christon, in your experience, can you tell us maybe some of the differences on how celebrity defendants wait and spend time in jail or prison versus regular defendants?
So I think the first thing about celebrity defendants is that there's probably, if they're awaiting trial, there's probably a lesser chance that they're actually awaiting trial in jail, right? Because a lot of them have the means, they have the money, they can post bond. If they're in state court where money bond is an option, they're generally going to be able to post that bond. If they're in federal court, they may not be seen as much of a flight risk. We saw Lori Loughlin and those folks involved in that federal college admissions scandal awaiting trial outside of jail or prison. And so I think that's the first distinction I would make in that respect. For people who celebrities who are in jail, potentially awaiting trial, they're probably going to have access to a lot more things like money for, commissary to be able to make trades with people, things like that. Although that's what you generally are getting into with celebrity folks once they've been convicted. Because again, generally pre-trial, you're not going to have people with means who are generally awaiting trial in jail. But once someone has been convicted and is in prison, and this can vary from state to state, really. A lot of times we see when prisons do their intake to see like what someone's risk assessment is, what their needs are, what sort of attacks on the system they're going to be. I think there's some examples out of California. I think we hear about that frequently, where famous people might have to go do some time in the LA County jail, right? And their time gets cut in half and they get triaged out of there pretty quickly. Certainly, it's not like that for everyone everywhere. But for people who have longer sentences, certainly I think they might have access to things that other people wouldn't. There's a business, for example, prison consultants. That's a business. So for people of means, who have a report date, let's say you've got a report date to federal prison, they will actually hire prison consultants to meet with them. And generally, a prison consultant is someone who has actually spent time in a federal prison. And then they offer their services to advise people of, what to do when you get there, things to avoid, whether you want to actually outsource your job or not, or whether it might reflect better on you if you actually do your job while you're in the prison. Who to talk to, who not to talk to, who not to run afoul of.
There's been movies made about this kind of thing.
Sure. And Orange is the New Black. I think a lot of people saw
Yes.
that on Netflix. So I think there's certainly a lot of considerations, but those can be the sorts of things that I think you see with people with more means taking advantage of if they're on their way to prison, have some prison time coming up, in terms of figuring out how they need to navigate that time.
So two important distinctions. One is we're talking about jail or prison. And in the case of Andrew Tate, as we've talked about before, he has not been convicted yet. He's not even been in trial yet. So he's in jail. And other celebrities that we're going to be talking about, they've passed the time and done things in prison. Now, when someone is, and I thought it was really important that you brought up, if you have means, then you can post bond and you don't have to spend the time in jail. Andrew Tate has means, but I believe because of his flight risk and the different laws that we have in Romania, he's not leaving jail even if he had twice as much money as he had. There's just no way. So that's, I think, important. One question follow on for that. How do rich people access their money to make trades and deal with commissaries and stuff when they're in prison?
You still have to have somebody on the outside that's putting it on your books. And some facilities will have limits on how much you can have on your books at one time, but you still have to have somebody outside who's doing that. There's not like an ATM machine in the jail or prison, or you can just go and start, pulling out cash. So they try to they try to make it egalitarian in that respect. But certainly, if you have somebody on the outside that's maxing out your commissary every week or every 2 weeks, that's certainly a little, that's advantageous. That's a good thing, and there are a lot of
Hmm.
people who wish they could be in that situation.
What are some common hobbies that defendants would have while in prison?
Working out is definitely going to be at the top of the list. Working out, trying to stay in good shape or get into good shape. I've seen people who get in really, really good shape because when there's limited access to things to do. I mean, you can sit around and watch some TV, but there are a lot of people who really try to focus their mind, focus on just kind of maxing out what they can do physically.
Hmm.
There's working out. There are Once you're sentenced, this isn't really applicable pre-trial, but once you're sentenced to prison, a lot of times the judge will order, if you haven't completed a high school diploma, a GED, you'll be ordered to complete classes that would lead to a GED. So there's a lot of educational opportunities in prison too, which is also a reason why a lot of my clients, for example, who know that they are headed to prison, we might have cases where we're trying to get the best plea possible to reduce the amount of time they're exposed to, but there will be prison time involved. They definitely want to go ahead and get to prison so they can start taking advantage of some of those educational opportunities with classes, to be able to get certain diplomas. And there are a lot of outside groups and organizations that come to volunteer in prisons, like
Hmm.
Toastmasters, for example. There's actually chapters of Toastmasters in most jails and prisons. And yeah, things, just groups and organizations like that. There's a lot of prison outreach that goes
Hmm.
on. I did read that apparently Andrew Tate has made statements, or his surrogates have made statements for him, that he has actually redone his will while he is in prison awaiting his charges. And so that seems like something good too. I highly recommend people have a good up-to-date estate plan. So that
Yeah,
was
no,
interesting to
that's
read. That
very
was
interesting.
interesting.
And we'll get
Mm-hmm.
more to Andrew Tate in just a second. But
Yeah.
are there any restrictions for inmates of things they can't do that they would generally want to do to pass the time? I mean, there
Uh,
probably are. But so what could you tell us? What are some things that aren't allowed?
well, certainly, like leaving premises for any reason is
Right, of
not going to
course.
be allowed. And a lot of times too, it's going to depend, especially when you're talking about a state or the federal prison system. What somebody is convicted of is incredibly important in
Mm,
determining what they're going to have access to and the kinds of opportunities they're going to have access to. The federal prison camp that we have about 90 miles away here in North Carolina, over in Butner, where Bernie Madoff was serving his sentence, a little bit different than the
right.
Supermax facility out in Colorado,
Hmm.
where you're confined to your cage for 23 and a half hours a day. And it's super, super high security. So it just depends on what the risk assessment of that individual prisoner is, particular inmate, in terms of what they're going to let somebody have access to. Certainly, somebody who's been convicted of some financial crimes, a college admission thing, that's going to be treated, and who doesn't have a prior record is going to be treated differently than someone who's been convicted of a violent crime.
If you see one of the Netflix documentaries, they say Bernie Madoff would do taxes for some of the other inmates as
Mm-hmm.
a way to use it. And maybe so something you could use your skills sometimes
Oh,
with.
sure. Lawyers who do appeals for people. Yeah.
Very interesting
Yeah.
stuff. Now, back to Andrew Tate. He has tweeted and let people know that his workout regime is off the charts right now. He's allegedly doing 500 squats, 500 push-ups, walks 10 kilometers a day. He's practicing his martial arts. What role, I think we've already touched on this. What role have you seen physical activities play for inmates?
I think it's a good way to focus on something positive. I
Hmm.
think there's a big mind body connection. And if you can focus on physical activity and on something that prison is not controlling, it can definitely keep you focused mentally in terms of the fight that's still yet to come. Because I think the end of February, they just extended his detention for another 30 days, and he still doesn't have charges from what I understand. So, he could be in this for the long haul at this point. And so I think anything, that's something you think about, like, shoot, if I were in jail for some reason, that's a positive way to pass the time, because there's a lot of negative ways, I think, to pass the
Hmm.
time in the jail, and there's a lot of places that your mind can go. I've talked to enough inmates and kind of had enough feedback in that respect. There's a lot of places that your mind goes, and if you have a workout regimen like that keeps your mind focused on
Hmm.
something positive, and exercise is a positive thing, I think that can be helpful for anybody.
Right. Well, and on that note, another famous celebrity, Mike Tyson, famous boxer, he says that the time he spent in prison was some of the best years of his life. Interestingly, because he was able to practice meditation, find inner peace, not have the outside influences of money impacting his mental health. So, on that note, what kind of impacts do you think mental health have on defendants and maybe some of your clients?
I think that being confined like that in a jail can certainly exacerbate underlying mental health issues for sure. And we suffer from such a lack of proper mental health services in society in general, but also
That's right.
especially in our jails and prisons, where it's really important that we have to treat people well, and we have to make sure that people have access to the care that they need, both physical and mental. But being locked up and caged like that can really do a number on somebody's mental health, even somebody who wasn't previously struggling with any sort of underlying mental health problem.
Hmm.
And so, meditation's a good thing. And I think even, I mean, he converted to Islam and found religion. And I think he had a very focused workout regimen as well. I think I remember reading something about him commenting he dented that concrete floor in his cell working out so stringently. And so I think he used that time to get into like just tip top shape, whether
Yeah.
both his mind and his body.
He apparently did convert to Islam, and Andrew Tate is also releasing statements discussing how he is reading the Quran daily and he's finding more, solace, I suppose, through Islam and religion. And then we've also talked about the former mobster Michael Franzese. He would read the Bible daily and said that saved him while being in solitary confinement. Do your clients ever, or do you hear of others who find religion to be extremely important when they are confined in jail or prison?
I think so, for sure. It can be a very lonely time when you're literally confined in a cage. And I think anything that can bring some kind of solace and comfort, sure, people are definitely going to cling to that. There's also a lot of religious programming that comes into jails and prisons from the outside with volunteers and outreach.
Hmm.
And so I think that, then inmates can avail themselves of those opportunities as well. But I think it can provide a great deal of comfort in a very, very, very dark time and place.
Right. Can defendants ever lack access to certain religious practices they want to pursue or physical activities that their desire? And you as a lawyer or as defense lawyer, are you able to help your client secure these types of activities or religious practices?
Generally, they're not going to be disallowed from practicing religion or engaging in those activities. I will say the one caveat, though, is just based on their risk assessment in whatever prison where they are, based on what they're there for, the crimes that they've been convicted of. It just depends what they have access to. Short of being deemed a security risk or a security threat.
Well, let's say as me as an inmate, I needed access to a kosher meal or halal food,
Oh,
that kind of thing.
sure, sure. No, no. If it's right, if it's some kind of food based thing, religious practice, then yes, they should not have any issue getting access to. They shouldn't. I say they shouldn't have an issue. And I haven't
Mhm.
run across a client who needed something like that and was being denied it. But
Okay.
that is something that yes, that could be dealt with in courts if necessary.
Going back to your experience, how do you typically engage and work with clients that are in jail? What does that look like?
I treat them like people.
Okay.
I treat them like human beings, and I have conversations with them just like I would have conversations with somebody that I'm meeting outside of jail for the first time. And one thing that I find very important to do is generally the first time I meet with a client, I in our jails here we have non-contact visit rooms where you're separated by glass. And what I always do the very first time I go to meet a new client is I request that I get a contact room down on their booking floor, so that they actually bring my client down to see me and we're actually in the same room together and we can sit down at the table and actually have a conversation like
Mhm.
two people who are just sitting at a restaurant or sitting somewhere else, and we're not sitting in a jail. Jail's an incredibly dehumanizing place. Talking to people through glass is awful. And when somebody's been sitting there in conditions like that, it can mean the world to somebody to have someone who will actually just sit and talk to them face to face and treat them like a human being. And that's really just the first thing that comes to mind when asked, like, how do I work with somebody who's being held in custody, is just treat them like a person.
That's excellent. And I hope all defense attorneys and prosecutors do that as well. But who knows? But any other challenges or obstacles to, we're all guaranteed under the Constitution in the United States to have access to our lawyers. But if you're in jail or you're in prison, are there timing constraints? Are there other communication challenges, language barriers sometimes? How do you deal with those things?
Sure. So in our local jails here in my jurisdiction, we have access to our clients 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I can go on the weekends. I could go at night. It might be annoying and they might take a while to get me in, but they have to let me
Hmm.
see my client.
I see.
Um, State prison works a little bit differently. They can't deny you access, but they actually have to you actually have to schedule a time. You have to contact the prison ahead of time, be on the list, and go at the scheduled time to go see your client. You can't just show up and say, "Hey, I
Mm.
want to see so and so." And so that is a big difference there. And federal prison works pretty much the same way. But certainly, if someone was denying me the ability to go see a client or have meaningful access to a client. For example, there's one jail in my jurisdiction, and when someone is being housed on the maximum security floor, they actually don't have a face to face meeting room where you're kind of separated by a mesh panel that you can still see each other through and talk through. They make you go to this phone bank instead.
Okay.
And there's a phone that has a recorded line and a phone with an unrecorded line for attorney calls. The recorded line always works, but I'm never going to use that one because obviously my conversations don't get recorded with my clients. But and the non-recorded phone was broken for a really long time.
Mm.
And I'm not going to sit there and scream back and forth through the glass with my clients because the conversation we're having is privileged. And so I've had to demand that we get taken to a room. And, I don't care if he's in max. I don't care if you think he's a security risk. He's not going to do anything to me. I'm his lawyer. I'm here to
Yeah.
help him. And the Sixth Amendment guarantees my client meaningful access to me. And meaningful access is not screaming at the top of my lungs through a glass panel so that we can hear each other and that probably half the jail can hear our conversation too.
Right.
So it's certainly important. I think I always counsel newer attorneys, hey, you got to push back a little bit if
Uh-huh.
if you're getting that kind of a response and say no, we can't do that. You got to push back. You got to push back.
Suspicious, very suspicious that the recording phone works, but the
Mm-hmm.
non-recording doesn't. It
Mm-hmm.
seems like what's the incentive for them to fix that one? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Yeah,
little, but no, this was all really, really interesting, and I think adds a really important element right now as we follow the Andrew Tate trial to see what he possibly could be doing with his time as we think about other celebrities and other people who are spending time in jail, what they can be doing to pass the time.
sure.
So, Kristen, that was a really helpful insight. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thanks for having me back again.
Yeah, of course. So, everyone, thank you so much. Make sure to comment. Tell us what you would do spending time in jail to pass the time. And yeah, stay tuned as we continue to monitor ongoing celebrity trials. Thank you.